The role players for the Marlins are crucial for success in 2026.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Marlins. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. I'm a diehard Marlins fan, and I've podcasted about the team for the last 4 seasons. You can find me on Twitter at Jeremiah Geiger2, and thank you for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, and leave a like. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And on today's show, joining me is Issac Azout from Fish on First. Isaac, welcome into the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it. A lot of us on our staff, we listen to this religiously, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Really excited to get to this episode. Lot to cover. We're going to talk about the impact that the role players have on the Marlins. They played a big part in 2025. Peter Bendix is great, I think, at winning in the margins, and he's going to need to do so again if the Marlins want to continue taking steps forward next season. Also, talk about Pauley and Connor Norby. That's a discussion that I think I'm going to have a lot over this offseason. I know you guys are at Fish on First, just the whole third base situation in general. So we'll get into that and maybe talk about some hypothetical trades or some farm system later on if we have time. But let's start, Isaac, by talking about the role players on this team. And the way I look at it, it kind of comes down to this. When the Marlins started this rebuild, the whole goal was evaluate all the talent, all the players in your system, and figure out who's going to be here for the long run. And I think it's safe to say that I view Kyle Stowers as a cornerstone player. I view Jacob Marcy as a cornerstone player. Augustin Ramirez, position aside, I think his hit tool, the bat, the power, that's a cornerstone. But everybody else, there's a level of questions whether they're going to be here for the long term. Right. So for you, Isaac, when you look at this roster, how do you view the role players on this team?
Well, something I'd like to start with is just the fact that we were able to name 3 solidified guys that we know we can pen in for next year. That's something that we haven't been able to do in years previous. So I think that says a lot about the front of this organization, the front office, and Peter Bendix's job. So aside from those 3 that you mentioned, in Stowers, Marcy, and Ramirez, who you can pretty much, like I said, pencil in, I think you look at someone like Otto Lopez, who you can count on to be your everyday shortstop. Looking down the pipeline, there's not many guys that could probably replace him at this point yet. Xavier Edwards is another one who really, after moving to second base, continued to hit the way we knew he was capable of, despite a little bit of a slump later on that took him out of the batting title race. He continued to do really well. And then aside from that, it's a little bit of question marks. Like you said, first base is a huge question mark if you ask me. We're going to have to see what the Marlins do in the offseason for that. But it looks like you have at least catching solidified. You have all 3 outfield spots solidified. Up the middle, infield solidified. So I think the main area of focus should be the corner infield spots.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think it's interesting when we talk about shortstop and second base. Otto Lopez had a good season. Like, there wasn't anything wrong with his season. But then you look at, I guess, that superstar shortstop profile that you want to have, face of the franchise type player. Can he elevate his game to that level? I don't necessarily think he's going to all of a sudden have an 850 OPS next year. I think he's a low 700 OPS guy, got unlucky, showed some power, hit 15 bombs, maybe can get to 20. But for the time being, he's a solid 3.5 WAR player. Like you said, there's nobody in the farm system that's close to even taking his job. And I know the Marlins emphasized on getting middle infield depth, because especially last offseason, Max Acosta, Jared Cerna at the trade deadline in 2024, but they haven't really panned out. For Edwards, I think you could pretty much count on him as being a cornerstone player as well, just because of his profile. He's good at second base defensively, obviously a Gold Glove finalist, so shout out to X. And then what does he do? He just slaps the ball the other way, gets his singles, and then steals bases, which I'd like to see him tap more into in 2026. But, first base and third base is so fascinating because we're going to talk about third base in the next segment. But for first base, Isaac, they have 3 players on the roster right now who played first base. I mean, Liam Hicks, who they gave a chance. He's 5'9". I don't really know how that makes sense defensively. Wagaman, I don't really know how you feel about Wagaman, but I'm going to start by saying I don't really want to see the Marlins bring him back next season. I feel like he could be a DFA candidate. And then you have Troy Johnston, who we all root for.
Right. Yeah. So it feels like just yesterday that Matt Mervis was given every single opportunity to be their everyday first baseman, well, mostly against righties. In terms of Wagman, for some reason, I had thought that he's a free agent now, but no, the Marlins have him under control for the next 6 seasons. So you have to assume he will probably be back. He had an uneven season, Eric Wagman. Once he was only platooning against left-handed pitching, he did exponentially better. So I think that's a role that you could see him dive into, especially if Miami does not acquire any outside help for first base. A Troy Johnson, Eric Wagman, while not sexy at all, and I do not condone this, I think they should go outside the organization for some help. That would be a serviceable platoon situation where neither of those guys are awful defensively. And, you have somewhat of a high floor, or a decent floor, I should say, with the bat. But no, I'm with you, Jeremiah. I think that's something where there's a lot of decent free agent options that you mentioned before we started recording that I think Miami should dive into because I don't know how the Marlins could look at this 17-win improvement from last year and go right back with Eric Wagman and Troy Johnston. I think Troy Johnston has a role. He's 28, 29, serviceable against right-handed pitching, serviceable in the corner outfield spots at first base, but I think you need a little bit more.
Do you think that Liam Hicks is going to eventually be relegated to just a backup catcher? Because he was a great story out of the Rule 5 draft, but ultimately it feels like his ceiling is somewhat capped.
You'd think that it would be him and Joe Mack eventually as the 2 catching options. Once they realize what Agustin Ramirez is and he isn't, I think that I don't know why they didn't at least try him a little bit at first base. I was told that they saw him in the Yankees organization try and play first base and they were just not impressed at all. So if it were me, it would be a Hicks and Mack tandem behind the plate, and you have an everyday first baseman in Ramirez, albeit probably a very bad defensive first baseman. But for Hicks, yeah, I do think his ceiling is a offensive-oriented backup catcher. We know backup catchers tend to be, great defensively, like the Jeff Mathises of the world, the Austin Hedges of the world. And Liam Hicks, while he was great at receiving, just struggled throwing runners out. Obviously, the pitch calling is out of his hands anyway. So I think you might see a change in philosophy when it comes to choosing backup catchers nowadays. But I would say on some teams, he could be a starting catcher. On the Marlins, which is a great problem to have, he's probably your backup.
Yeah, I'm right there too. I think Joe Mack is going to be the guy eventually. And honestly, the way the Marlins have continued to approach this Agustin Ramirez situation, it baffles me because, we could tell by June that this guy is just not a major league catcher defensively. He's up there for his bat. That's why they acquired him. And so I said this offseason, give him a first base glove if you're not going to pony up the cash to go get an everyday above average regular at first. So we'll see what happens. It's fascinating. I know the free agent market is saturated with intriguing guys. You have aging veterans. I know in your your roster projection, your very early roster projection, you had Paul Goldschmidt, who's coming off of a solid season. I had an episode where I talked about Ryan O'Hearn as being an option. So it's going to be fascinating. What's also fascinating is moving from first base to the other corner infield spot, and that's the third base situation, because it looks like for the time being, the Marlins are going to have a competition between Graham Pauley and Connor Norby. So we're going to dive into the details of that right after this. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. There we go. Right graphics up. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you won't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is great because it gives you so many options and so many ways to play. You can build parlays, you can try player props, and even follow the live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. And for me, this NFL week, got the Chargers and the Colts. Chargers are a slight favorite. So, if I'm feeling a little energetic, I might throw some money on the cover for the Chargers. I think it's -1.5. So if you have a hunch that you want to go out this NFL Sunday and put some money on, visit FanDuel.com, download the app today, and get started. Back here with Issac Azout. Shout out to all the everyday listeners out there who make Locked On Marlins a part of your daily routine. The third base situation is fascinating because we're coming off of a year in which Connor Norby was supposed to be the guy, and unfortunately, he just wasn't. He had an injury-riddled season, couldn't stay healthy, and then when he was on the field, he graded out very poorly defensively, and he still has the same struggles at the plate. He can't lay off anything. He's never seen a pitch that he didn't like. He's a free swinger. Graham Pauley took his opportunity and suddenly became an elite defensive third baseman coming out of nowhere. Nobody had this in his scouting reports dating back to his time with the Padres. So a Barry Jackson article in the Miami Herald a couple weeks ago laid out that from what he's been hearing, the Marlins are essentially going to have an open competition between Pauley and Norby in spring training. Isaac, where do you stand on all of this?
It's just funny. Who would have thought that after following the 2024 season that Kyle Stowers would be the one with the legitimate job locked up in the starting outfielder and Connor Norby would have to fight for his job at third base. The Connor Norby situation baffles me. I don't think a lot of us were too surprised when we saw him struggle offensively when he got off the IL in 2025. Graham Pauley, he also struggled with the bat a little bit, but since when he returned off the IL in his second stint, he just raked and, like you said, provided incredible defense at the hot corner. And despite him hitting well and fielding well, the Marlins still put Connor Norby at third and moved Graham Pauley, the elite third baseman, off the position. So that probably shows you which way they'd like to go with this competition starting in spring training. To me, I think that you might as well try it. Xavier Edwards was on the IL at the time. I would like to try Connor Norby at second base if that's a possibility. I don't know. Obviously, Xavier Edwards is there. But if he does get hurt again, I'd like to see that possibility. And Graham Pauley, as a left-handed hitter, could get a lot of reps facing right-handed pitching. And I think that he has more than proven that he is more than capable as a third baseman defensively. I think they just like Norby's bat a little bit more, although I have heard that they're not as enamored as they once were when they acquired him, with either offensively or defensively. But we'll have to see how that plays out.
And it's coming from a guy that said in the preseason before opening day, hey, I want to go out and hit 30 bombs. And he put this high level of pressure on himself. And Connor Norby is very vocal in his approach to the fans, to the media. Just he says what he feels, and but unfortunately just couldn't live up to the expectations. For Pauley, I really felt it was more of a case of not getting the opportunities in order to be consistent. He got called up opening day very early. Nobody expected that. Struggled. And I don't put it on him because he wasn't supposed to be there. He needed more seasoning in AAA. And like you said, off the IL, when he got an extended amount of playing time, that's where you saw the power numbers, the EVs tick up. And so I'm of the opinion that the best players got to play, no matter the prospect pedigree, no matter that you traded Trevor Rogers for Norby. Norby was the headliner without a doubt. I'm leaning at this point in mid-October to Graham Pauley being the starter at third because his glove is so valuable. I almost consider him our version of Ke'Bryan Hayes. I mean, Ke'Bryan Hayes is the best defensive third baseman in baseball. His bat sucks. He can't hit. But the Reds went out and traded for him, and their fan base was happy. And
they made the postseason.
And they made the playoffs. And we like making the playoffs around here. So I feel like if they upgrade first base and you're getting elite defense from Pauley at third, I feel like the infield is in a much better spot than it was this past season.
Graham Pauley was a one-win player last year, despite very limited opportunities. I think it was 62 games. Despite not hitting, like you said, not quite at Ke'Bryan Hayes level of bat, but he had a 678 OPS. All of that value is a one-win player. in such a limited sample size. So Norby was a little bit lower at 0.7 B-WAR. Yeah, I agree. If they were to upgrade first base just a little bit, I'm not sure if they're going to. They seem to like some of their internal options, but at third base, I think I hate to say it, but a platoon of those two guys also makes a little bit of sense. They're going to give Connor Norby every chance to earn that spot back. If not at third, maybe in the outfield. You mentioned Griffin Conine in right field, maybe a platoon with him in the outfield. But defensively at third base, it's tough to watch, and you can, sacrifice defense at catcher, at first, and at third. I know you have great defense up the middle, but it's defense is also very important.
It makes you wonder, honestly, like how many wins you could have gotten if you had better defense behind the plate, especially. I mean, in a playoff race in this era of the expanded postseason, every win matters. We saw that with the Mets in the final game. Just one win here or there can get you a playoff spot. And from there, once you're in the dance, anything can happen. Just for reference, Pauley, 93rd percentile in outs above average with seven OAA. So great stuff from him. You mentioned the outfield quickly before the next segment. In that right field spot, the corner spot, assuming there's no free agent signing or trades, the way I look at it is a possible platoon between Conine and Heriberto Hernandez, who I think has done enough to put him above the pecking order of a Dane Myers, for example. I think Heriberto has the edge right now.
Yeah, I'm a big Dane Myers guy, but unfortunately the bat just took a really big slump in the middle of last season. He's going off and on the IL a couple of times. And the outfield, this is one of the positions or one of the areas of the Marlins roster where they have plenty of options, right? You mentioned two all-star candidates in Kyle Stowers and Jacob Marcy. You have pretty much four guys who you can maybe try in right field or left field, whichever one they don't want to put Kyle Stowers in. You have Kemp Alderman knocking on the door, Heriberto Hernandez, like you mentioned. What a find by Peter Bendix coming and doing what he did. And with Griff, you don't know what kind of success he's going to have after such a long layoff. He begins with the Dominican Winter League soon. But yeah, I would like that platoon option a lot. Heriberto showed great defense as well in the corner outfield spot. So I don't want to say that this is a Yelich, Ozuna, Stanton outfield because it's not even close. But this is one of the best outfields Miami has had in a very long time.
And I think if they all played up to their potential and reach these goals, it can be one of the best in the National League for sure. If Stowers can replicate success, Marcy, who I view as a 5-tool player, really can do it all on the baseball diamond. It's really that third spot where there's a bit of a question mark. Do you think that there are any players currently on the 40-man that saw action from a season ago that are slowly being phased out that you wouldn't be surprised if the Marlins move on before opening day next year?
I think Troy is one of those guys who saw time in the corner outfield spots. I'm not sure how much of a chance they want to give him starting a new season 2026. This is a guy that led all of minor league baseball in RBI in 2023. They had Yuli Gurriel playing first base, clogging up the position. This is a team that lost 100 games in 2024, did not give him a chance. They basically gave him one out of necessity in 2025. And while he did do what we all thought he would do, he would hold his own with the bat, play good defense. I think he might be one of the guys that they do move on from eventually with this 40-man roster squeeze happening in November, I believe. He's one of those, unfortunately, that I do see he might be squeezed out. Dave Myers is another one
that's what I was going to say.
They did have a little bit of trade talks with him, with the Cincinnati Reds specifically, that they were trying to move on from Dave Myers earlier in the season. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's another one that gets squeezed off.
Because like you said, also, Kemp Alderman's knocking on the door. I mean, tore it up in AAA once he got called up. And I'm a big Kemp Alderman believer. I think he can come up here, and his profile, it says I can be an above average major leaguer. Got the power, speed, the exit velocities. There really isn't a huge, flaw in his game that says this guy's going to flame out and bust. But you never know, because the difference from AAA to the majors is so huge. I mean, Lewis Brinson, for anybody listening out there.
It's never been large. The talent gap has never been larger, and Lewis Brinson is a perfect example. And there's a ton of them out there, unfortunately.
So coming up next, we're going to talk about potential trades. Will the Marlins be active not just in free agency, but in the trade market specifically? That's coming up right after this. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Every day we make decisions, but on PrizePicks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of this football season with PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. Playing PrizePicks is such a fun, simple way to add more excitement to football. You just pick more or less on player projections, for example, like Josh Allen's passing yards or Saquon Barkley rushing for a touchdown, and you're in the game. PrizePick is quick. It only takes a minute to set your lineup, and they've got a couple really cool features. One of them is the injury reboot feature. So if your player leaves early due to injury, doesn't return, it's not going to count against you. And there's a special discount live on the board right now. On October 21st, the Warriors and the Lakers game, Steph Curry is discounted to only needing more than half a point to win. So that feels like a gimme right there. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. A reminder, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. And remember that you can also subscribe to the show on all the major podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, you name it. Issac Azout from Fish on First, Jeremiah Geiger here. Trades. The Marlins really haven't been buying when it comes to trades the last couple seasons. Sellers in 2024. They stood pat in 2025. Is this a year, or is this an offseason rather, where the Marlins try to improve their roster at the major league level via the trade market? And that could mean trading away an existing major leaguer, maybe from their pitching depth. I think it's a real possibility.
Yeah, it's an exciting time because, since Peter Bendix has come over and taken over the baseball operations department, we haven't seen him in a buying situation quite yet. And I think this offseason, it offers a perfect opportunity to do that. This is a 17-win improvement from the year before. This is a team that is expected to at least be in contention for a playoff spot in 2026. And yes, I do expect them to at least add. There's been multiple reports already, like Barry Jackson, Craig Mish reported that they do look to at least add to the bullpen. I think that's an area of strength, and I think that's great that they're trying to add a little bit more because we saw it all of last year that when Ronnie was unavailable, O'Shea was unavailable, Tyler Phillips was unavailable, they had to settle with guys like Josh Simpson, George Soriano pitching meaningful innings that I think they don't want to happen again. So I can see them going out, adding in free agency. One of the four guys they mentioned was Devin Williams. It seems to be one of their guys, whether it's a one-year deal with a mutual option or perhaps I was under the understanding that he might require 2 years, but he apparently is a main target. Kyle Finnegan was another one. Ryan Helsley, another one, who all had their problems in 2025, but I guess that's why the Marlins would be able to afford them. And in regards to trades, for some reason, I have a feeling that I can see the Marlins making a trade from their relief depth. I think one of the guys that really performed well, maybe like a Tyler Phillips or a Fauché or a Bender for sure, I can see them moving on from one of those guys to another competitive ball club, and in return, it could get another major leaguer to maybe help out with either first base, third base, or maybe a utility player. But I could see them doing a lot of bullpen shuffling this offseason for sure.
I like that idea with the bullpen depth because you have bullpen depth in your minor league system who I think Josh White, was just a stud in AAA, striking out everybody. Nigel Belgrave's another name to keep an eye on next season. And they never really gave Josh White an opportunity, which I thought was strange. Christian Roa, I would have liked to see get more of a chance at the major league level because, they got electric stuff. They throw hard. But instead we had George Soriano in September.
Yeah, I asked about Josh White. I asked at the ballpark, why is this guy not been given it? He's just not on the 40-man. They didn't want to do any of the 40-man shuffling at the end of the season. They wanted guys that could eat innings, hence George Soriano, hence the Simpsons, hence the Bozos. But I think next year you see a totally different strategy there. I especially in September, the Marlins are in postseason contention at the point where they were this year. I don't think you see them carrying as much, but I do expect Josh White, Eknes, Belgrave to all get big opportunities in spring training, and I expect them to be with the ball club at some point in 2026, no doubt.
And going to the rotation depth, that's where I'm really looking at an opportunity to trade a starting pitcher and maybe get a bat in return, another prospect as well, because it's kind of backlogged in terms of guys that will be available and healthy. But there's ultimately only 5 spots. And obviously you have to account for possible injuries. You can never have enough starting pitching. But in the Marlins situation, I think they're in a good position to at least take calls on certain guys. I don't want to see the Marlins trade Sandy or Cabrera. I'm not on that train. I think if you traded one of those guys, it's a signal to the fan base that you're not ready to compete yet, and that would just be, I mean, like, we're doing this all over again. We're still in the rebuild. But trading a guy, maybe like take calls on Max Meyer, because I don't think Max Meyer's a starting pitcher in the Marlins organization. Maybe another team thinks he is. Ryan Weathers is an interesting guy because he hasn't been able to stay healthy, but when he is, he's got one of the highest ceilings in the org. So I think they take calls on some starting pitchers. Is there a guy that you have in mind maybe that could be on the move from the rotation, or are you kind of settled on the bullpen depth being the main trade chips that the Marlins use?
I mean, we saw what happened to their starting pitching depth so early this season with Sandy Alcantara struggling. Connor Gillespie was in that
Opening day
for a very
rotation.
long. Yeah, he had a lot of turns in that rotation, and it's so tough. Like you mentioned, trading Sandy or Cabrera, what that would send. It's so tough to balance what the right baseball move is, and also trying to have decent PR, because let's say you're able to get Max Clark for Sandy Alcantara. The casual baseball fan in Miami knows who Sandy Alcantara. They have no idea who Max Clark is.
Right.
But that's a hell of a baseball move if you're able to do it. Obviously, I don't think you would be able to do it. But so I don't envy Peter Bendix's position, because it's not easy to do the right thing in both aspects of your organization, right? It's also a business at the end of the day. But in my opinion, you have to keep Sandy. He's got 1 year left with another club option for 2027. Cabrera is also still making affordable money. You just don't know how his elbow's going to hold up. He missed a lot of time. I know surgery was on the table for him. They decided not to go in that direction, and he continued to pitch, and he pitched really well coming off the IL, surprisingly so. So I think Max Meyer would look great in the back end of that bullpen. If you ask me, you don't even have to go acquire Devin Williams. Just put Max Meyer. I think that'd be a great position for him. Braxton Garrett's another guy that we've forgotten about. We haven't gotten many updates with him. I don't know how much value he would have on the open market. And then Ryan Weathers is another guy who just hasn't been able to show that he can stay healthy, unfortunately. So in regards to trading a starting pitcher, I think they look at what's happened the last few years in spring training, and they see that you can never have too much starting pitching depth. So I'm not sure if I see them trading a starting pitcher, unless, ironically, it's Sandy or Eddie.
Do you have an opening day projection for your starting five? I asked Eli Sussman, and me and him differed on one guy. We had the big three, Yuri, Sandy, Eddie, Weathers, and then he said Junk, and I said Braxton Garrett, assuming Garrett's healthy and ready to go. But I mean, it's like Garrett was out for a year and a half. Jansen Junk had 13 walks all season, over 100 innings. So you might give the edge to Junk, who I think is a viable option. Again, on the margins, came out of nowhere. Would you lean toward Junk or towards Garrett for that fifth spot, or somebody else?
And not only that, I believe Junk is out of minor league options. So
yes.
He would have to make the opening day roster anyway. And I think they like him as a starter. And boy, he just surprised, another great find by Peter Bendix. And in regard to Braxton Garrett, he might be a non-tender candidate, honestly.
Wow.
I don't know what's going to happen with him. He might make it through the offseason and come to spring training. But even when he's healthy, they really giving you 4 or 5 innings? Probably not. So, if it were me, I'd probably lean Jansen Junk for sure, even though I'd love to have that second lefty in the rotation. I think that adds a lot of value, especially if your only lefty in the bullpen is going to be Cade Gibson. But yeah, I'm not sure. Of the two, definitely Jansen Junk, but that's why I could see them maybe adding another starting pitcher, a Cal Quantrill type deal, to just in case, man, because you never know what's going to happen.
A Cal Quantrill type deal without the Cal Quantrill results.
Correct.
That's what we're looking for.
A 1 year, $7.5 million deal. It's crazy that they've only spent $8.5 million in free agency in the 2 years. I expect that to go up significantly this offseason.
Yeah, Tim Anderson, you had Cal Quantrill, and ironically, the most production you received, arguably, was Eric Wagaman, who was signed to a split contract. It wasn't even a true major league contract.
No.
I think it was a 2-year. I don't know the money behind it, but it was very low money for Wagaman.
The Wagaman, I believe, it was below $1 million for sure.
Yeah,
it was in the $500,000 range.
Yeah, if it was above a couple million, we'd be like, all right, what are we even seeing here? Because
And the reason I mentioned the Garrett, that he's due in arbitration. He's expected to make $1.5 million this year. That's the only reason I suspect maybe a non-tender candidate. I'm not sure. I think it all depends on Edward Cabrera and his health. And if, let's say, knock on wood, that Cabrera is hurt and he's unable to pitch next year, that's a few $1,000,000 that they're going to be sunk money. You're going to be paying him to not do anything. So they're going to have to do some shuffling around with the finances for sure, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, no, it will. This is a fun offseason ahead of us. Isaac, we're going to wrap it up here. Appreciate you for coming on the show. It was a blast.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
Absolutely. And that's going to do it for today's show of Locked On Marlins. Until next time, guys, stay safe, stay locked on, and let's go fish.